the spy who betrayed Hitler and was erased from history books during World War II. If you're watching Battlefield Survival, you already know World War II is full of celebrated heroes, infamous traitors, and a vast gray zone of forgotten figures. But every so often, you come across a character whose story is so strategically important, yet so thoroughly buried, that it forces you to reconsider how intelligence shaped the entire war. So let's open with a hook that deserves the first minute of your attention. We're looking at a man who moved inside the Third Reich's security architecture, who fed the Allies critical intelligence while standing directly under the gaze of Himmler's SS. His actions didn't just save lives, they altered operations, shaped counterintelligence strategy, and exposed weaknesses in the Nazi system that historians still analyze today. Yet his name rarely appears in mainstream media, and many of his contributions remain sealed in wartime archives. Today we're bringing him back into the conversation, not as a legend, but as a real operator who risked everything. Now let's get straight into the story, the context, and the actionable lessons modern survivalists and military thinkers can extract from this buried piece of intelligence history. Explaining who Rudolf Roessler really was and why his intelligence mattered more than the Reich ever realized, the man history nearly forgot is Rudolf Roessler, codename Lucy. Many casual history fans have heard the name but never understood the scale of what he accomplished. Roessler wasn't a soldier, officer, or politician. He was a German refugee living quietly in Switzerland, but he possessed something far deadlier than any weapon: a network of highly placed contacts inside Hitler's high command. These were men disgusted by Hitler's strategic incompetence and the moral collapse of the regime. They trusted Roessler because he was discreet, disciplined, and deeply opposed to Nazi doctrine. From 1942 onward, Roessler began transmitting some of the most precise and timely intelligence the Allies ever received. These weren't vague reports, they were detailed descriptions of troop deployments, battle plans, and high-level directives often sent within hours of being drafted in Berlin. The Soviets received most of this information through the Lucy Ring, and they repeatedly acted on it, whether defending Kursk or adjusting their operations during Operation Bagration. Had the Nazis known the accuracy of these leaks, entire chains of command would have been purged. Roessler's greatest advantage was his operational discipline. He never sought fame and never revealed his sources. This is one of the reasons he vanished from many post-war narratives. Without a dramatic personal memoir or a post-war campaign to defend his legacy, he faded into the background while Allied intelligence services focused on their own political narratives. Understanding how Roessler's methods expose systemic flaws inside the Nazi intelligence apparatus is, honestly, pretty revealing. One of the most valuable lessons from Roessler's work is how he exploited the Reich's bureaucratic rigidity. Nazi command structures were hierarchical to the point of dysfunction. Information flowed upward through strict channels, and that meant insiders who had access to high-level planning often saw large sections of operational data. Because Hitler encouraged constant infighting between his officers, security protocols were inconsistent, and professionals in the general staff often resented SS oversight. This resentment created fertile ground for leaks. Roessler never penetrated the system physically. Instead, he managed relationships with those already inside it. This demonstrates a principle that modern intelligence agencies still rely on: secure human sources who operate in plain sight of their own regime. If you're a survivalist, or someone studying asymmetric warfare, take note. Systems that look airtight from the outside often contain ideological fractures on the inside. The more authoritarian the structure, the more disgruntled professionals it produces. Roessler leveraged that reality masterfully. A practical way to apply this lesson is to focus less on trying to break into a strong system and more on locating the natural pressure points within it. So, step 1 is to identify the individuals who have the most to lose or who feel the most trapped. Then, step 2, you build trust through ideological alignment rather than material incentives. After that, step 3 is to maintain strict compartmentalization, so no source ever knows the full network. Roessler, interestingly enough, followed these exact principles long before they were ever summarized in counterintelligence manuals. Now, let's explore the consequences of Roessler's intelligence and how it really shaped the course of World War II. Roessler's reports made their way into Soviet hands through the Rote Dre network, and, Stalin, despite his deep paranoia, often accepted Lucy's data, because it just kept proving accurate. When the Germans were preparing their defensive lines before Kursk, Roessler's information gave Soviet commanders enough clarity to plan elastic defenses and counteroffensives. Later on, during the collapse of Army Group Center, details about overextension and manpower shortages helped the Soviets strike precisely where the Germans were weakest. This doesn't mean Roessler alone won these battles, but he definitely provided the strategic insight that made Soviet operational planning significantly more effective. And yet, because the Cold War later rewrote the narrative, Western historians were hesitant to acknowledge a spy whose information mostly benefited the USSR. Meanwhile, Soviet historians downplayed him because they preferred crediting Soviet heroism rather than admitting reliance on foreign intelligence. The result really was erasure on both sides. For researchers, this reminds us to examine not just who gets credited in official histories but, honestly, who gets buried for political convenience. You can apply this to any conflict, whether ancient or modern. Always look for the shadow operators whose contributions don't fit the dominant narrative. Understanding why figures like Roessler matter to modern historians and survival-minded thinkers is, well, pretty crucial. Roessler teaches us how intelligence, when properly handled, can outperform brute force. He demonstrates how small, well-timed pieces of information can shift entire campaigns. For survivalists, there's a clear lesson here. Information superiority is a force multiplier. Whether you're analyzing a geopolitical crisis or planning how to maintain security in a destabilized environment, understanding how intel flows and how it can be disrupted is more valuable than just stockpiling equipment. A practical example is learning to map information channels in your own environment. Ask yourself, who gets access to what data, who controls the flow, and who feels dissatisfied with the current structure. Understanding those networks gives you leverage long before any physical confrontation occurs. If you want more deep-cut stories about hidden operatives, forgotten battles, and strategies that shaped the world, make sure you subscribe to Battlefield Survival. Share this video with anyone who loves real military history, not the watered-down version. And let's keep these stories alive where they belong.